Hi everyone. So I think it's 3 o'clock now. So I think this is a good a time as any to make a start. Hopefully you can all hear me and see all of my slides. That's perfect. I just got the thumbs up that you can hear me and see me, so that's good. Um, so I'm Dr. Heather Campbell. I'm a lecturer in entomology at the at Harper Adams University, who are obviously one of the co-hosts of this event today. Um, and I'm going to be talking to you. Well, my kind of relaxed title of the talk is How to Study Insects and Travel the World. What that actually means is that I'm going to be talking to you very briefly a little bit of background on my career. So, how did I kind of end up in entomology? What was my sort of path to get here? So, I'll quickly talk a little bit about that. I'm going to tell you some stuff about ants because that's what my research is on. So I'm really passionate about ants. I'm going to tell you about some of my favourites. And then finally, I'm going to chat a little bit about some of the field work that I do. So, as I say, some of that kind of travelling that I do when it comes to my entomology fieldwork. So, a little bit of a kind of flavour of everything. I can see the chat box, so I am happy for people to ask me questions either as we go along. I can sort of address things as I'm chatting, but we should also have lots of time at the end as well for people to ask me questions. So starting off just quickly to kind of tell you a little bit about my career and my background, how I ended up in this position. As I say, what my specialism is on ants. So I'm hoping to convince you today, not necessarily that you should become an ant biologist, but at least that you should appreciate ant biologists. And these are some of the weird and wonderful ants that we have from around the world. So they're not just these kind of tiny, small little black specks that we see running around on the pavement. They're weird and wild and wacky and sort of wonderful. But I didn't always love ants. I wasn't a child that grew up super interested in ants or even insects, really. I liked being outside and I liked nature. But I didn't know that, studying ants was even a job that you could really do. I grew up in a small town in Yorkshire here. My dad worked in a factory. My mum worked in a supermarket. I didn't know anyone that had been to university. I didn't know anyone that had any kind of career kind of researching animals or insects or anything like that. So it was completely new to me, this idea that this was something you could study. I went off to university at Lancaster University just to do kind of a overall biology degree. And then when I got there, I did a module and I found out, actually, you can study animals, you can study zoology. That's a legitimate career. So I changed everything that I was doing. I was going to do biomedical sciences. Threw all of that out and decided, okay, right, I'm going to study animals. That's what I want to do. This is finally I've found the thing that I'm interested in. And I worked for a few years, kind of in conservation and doing various different jobs, and then was lucky enough after a couple of years to get a scholarship with Imperial College to do a master's at the Natural History Museum. So I was based there for a little while. That was a very cool experience. So I spent about a year there. And when I was there, I did a big research project actually working on wasps. So that was the first time that I'd really done anything kind of related to insects. From there, I was given the opportunity to go and do a PhD in Reading. And this was the first time that I started studying ants. So I spent 4 or 5 years there, basically working on looking at ants that live on acacia trees. And for that, I was doing my fieldwork in Namibia and in South Africa as well. So I was kind of traveling around, and I really kind of got the travel bug there as well. And that was when I started to do some more international work rather than work that was just focused on the UK. After that, I went to complete a research position in Sydney. So again, on ants, I was firmly on the track of studying ants by this point. So I spent some time doing research on ants in forests in and around the kind of wider Sydney area. And then because of the PhD that I'd done, because I'd specialised in ants in Africa, I then had another research position in South Africa at the University of Pretoria. So I was there for 4 years doing research over there. And then I was looking to come back to the UK, so it's very nice living in these kind of exotic places around the world. but also I wanted to come back and be, kind of closer to my family and various other things. And this job came up at Harper Adams, where I am now, as a lecturer in entomology. And so as part of my job, I do lots of teaching of students, so undergraduate students, postgraduate students. I do research on various topics as well. So it's quite a varied job, mixing lots of different things together. So as you can tell, I've moved around quite a bit with my work, and I've been lucky enough to kind of travel a little bit as well. But it's certainly not, from the background that I came from, something that I thought existed as a career, or was something that I ever really imagined I could kind of end up doing. So yeah, that's a bit of the background of kind of the path that I took in the different places that I've been. As I say, my research is on ants, so that's what I'm going to tell you about now, because that's the stuff that I'm really passionate about and kind of super interested in. So looking at all of these, I'm hoping that actually you're looking at these images and you're thinking, okay, ants actually, they're pretty different and exciting, and they're not just, as I say, these boring black little specks that you might have come to imagine. So you can see that, they have a really wide variety of different forms. So they look really different. They're different sizes and shapes, and they have all these crazy kind of mandibles, these jaws and eyes. So they're really varied in appearance. And all of these different variety that they have in their appearance is down to the different things that they do within their kind of lives. So it might be that they're really well adapted to the environment that they live in, and that's why they look a certain way. It might be to do with the food that they eat. It might be something else to do with their behaviour. So all of these ways in which they look kind of odd and bizarre are to help them. They've kind of evolved to help some particular aspect of their natural history. So I'm going to tell you about a few of my sort of favourite, maybe more interesting ants that I really like. I could talk about this for hours. Some of my students have to hear about ants for hours. I'm not gonna spend that long talking to you about them, I promise. So first up, we have these ants. They belong to a few different genera. So Stigmatoma and Mystrium are some of the sort of scientific names that we use. More commonly, they're known as Dracula ants. Usually they feed on centipedes. So you can see two of them here. Basically, they've kind of got hold of the centipede with their mandibles, and they're also using, they have a sting that they can use to immobilize the centipede. So if everything's going fine in the colony, they'll be happily, going out. The workers will go out from the colony, forage for these centipedes. They'll bring them back basically to the nest. That's where the queen is. And then all of the kind of juvenile ants, so the eggs and the larvae and the pupae. So those workers will go out, get that food, and bring it back to the colony for everybody to eat. That's fine if there's lots of centipedes about and there's lots of food for everyone to eat. Unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't always happen. It might be, there's some kind of, drought, or there's some sort of shortage of food, which leads to lower numbers of centipedes in the environment. When that happens, these ants have they've basically developed this strategy where the adults are actually able to feed on the larvae. So insects, ants in particular, they don't really have blood in the same way that we have blood sort of going around in veins and arteries. They have something called hemolymph, which is kind of a similar substance to blood, but it sort of swishes around inside the whole of the sort of inside the body. And so what the ants do, these Dracula ants use these piercing mandibles. So you can see these jaws that they've got, these very elongated jaws. And they're perfectly designed for piercing into a centipede and sucking out all of their juices. But what they can do is they can actually pierce into their own larvae. So these are their own offspring, or in the case of the queen, their own offspring. If it's workers, it would be their sisters, basically. And they can pierce into them, suck out the hemolymph, which is the sort of equivalent of the blood, and actually use that as a source of food. It doesn't seem to harm the larvae. So actually the larvae grow up, they turn into pupae, and then they turn into adults, and they're completely fine, so it doesn't damage them. They do have two little piercing marks on them, in the same way that, if you know the kind of Dracula story, there would be two little incision marks on the neck. So that's why they're called Dracula ants, because they're essentially kind of sucking the blood. They only do it when there isn't enough food around, so they're not doing it as a normal way of feeding. But when times are hard, this is a strategy for them to get enough food, and that just helps the colony survive, tides them over until there are more centipedes for them to eat. So those are Dracula ants. The next ants that I wanted to talk about, they don't really have kind of a common name, so this is the scientific name, Melissa tarsus. They live predominantly in Africa, and you can find them in trees living underneath bark. So if you peel back bark of certain tree species, you'll find them. They have very hard mandibles, so they're actually able to chew through live wood. And you can see here, this is one of their nest sites. They're able to make these kind of galleries, these little tunnels. And so they tunnel their way, and they live their entire life within the tree. So you never see them going outside the tree. They live inside the tree. They do all of their feeding in there. They do all of their kind of reproduction. Everything happens basically in the colony inside the tree. What's really interesting is that they've developed this particular anatomy so that they're really well adapted to living in these little tunnels. So they don't have to walk along on a vertical surface, like this, kind of going along. They have to brace themselves against the sides of galleries. So if you can see from looking at this picture here, their first pair of legs are pointing kind of forwards, as they would normally. The second pair of legs are on backwards, so they're pointing behind them. And then the third pair of legs are pointing forwards again. So it means that they can actually brace themselves along the sides of tunnels. So when you collect these ants, they're very cute. You can kind of collect them, and if you put them on a petri dish or something and look at them down a microscope, unfortunately for them, they do actually topple over because they can't walk along on a normal horizontal surface. They're also really interesting because the adults actually spin silk from their heads, which they use to maintain their galleries, to maintain their nests that they live in. So my next ant that I wanted to talk to you about is so it's Nothomyrmacea, is its kind of scientific name. It's more commonly known as a dinosaur ant. The reason that they've been given this name is actually this ant is the one that looks most like ants that we've seen in fossils. So when we look at ants in amber, which we've got some really good fossils of ants in amber, this ant that we have here shares all of those features with ants that were basically around millions of years ago. And actually we don't see them anymore in any other modern ants. This is the only one that has this really unique combination of features. So it was very exciting when it was first discovered by ant biologists, and it was called the dinosaur ant because no one had ever really seen anything that looked like it before. It was described in 1934, so a party had gone out, they collected some insects, they gave them to this lady that they knew liked insects. She thought, oh, this is really important and exciting. She sent it off to somebody else who then described it, and ant biologists were really excited. And over the next kind of 40 years, there were at least 10 separate expeditions trying to find this ant again. It was known from this specimen you can see just in the top right here. The head had come off. I think maybe a leg had come off. It wasn't in very good condition. And if you look on the map, you can see it was collected where this little red pin was dropped, and everyone was searching around trying to find this ant. No one could find this kind of living dinosaur. Eventually, some entomologists were driving from one side of Australia to another, not looking for the ant, just on kind of just on a trip somewhere. They set up their camp one night, and they thought, oh, we'll go out and look for insects because that's what entomologists tend to do. And they rediscovered this ant. The thing that was really unusual is that they were about a 10-hour drive away from the original site where the ant was first described. So it was, I think, around 1,000 kilometers. So, I mean, on this map, it looks small, but Australia is huge. And yeah, they just happened to be camping there at the side of the road. They looked at some trees in the middle of the night. This ant's nocturnal, and they rediscovered this. Dinosaur ant there. So these ants, again, they don't have really kind of a common name. So one of the really interesting things about ants when we study them is that they have lots of very cool behaviors. So obviously they live as colonies where you have a queen, she lays eggs, and then the workers help her raise those eggs by giving them food, looking after them, kind of, defending them against any predators that might want to eat them. Some ants, instead of, having their own workers that help raise the young and get the food, they actually parasitize other species. So in the case of this ant, what she does, this one's a queen. So the one that you can see in the middle is a queen. She is a completely different species to the one around the sides. The species around the side is called Aphanagaster rudis. So it's a different species. What she does is she goes into the colony once she's kind of mated and she's ready to lay her eggs. She sneaks into the colony. She's really attractive to the other workers, so she has a special chemical so that they don't recognize her as being different or being kind of an enemy. She kills off the existing queen so that the queen isn't there to produce any eggs anymore. Starts laying her own eggs, and basically she manages to convince, using this special chemical profile, she convinces the other workers that actually she's their queen now. So she gets them to bring food, to her offspring, to raise those workers, and then eventually the existing colony is completely replaced by the parasite, so by the new queen. So ants can be also a little bit sneaky as well, a little bit clever with their behaviour. So the last few ants that I'm going to talk to you about are the turtle ants. So these, again, this happens in a few different kind of groups of ants. And what they've done is they've modified their heads. So I don't know if you can see here, there's actually an eye that's a little bit further down here on the head. And it's underneath, the top of the head has been modified into sort of a disc shape. The reason for this is that these worker ants actually help defend the nest by using their head to block it up. So you can see here, hopefully you can see in this top left picture, there are guard workers, and they basically make sure that the whole of, so they nest inside kind of empty branches and twigs, and the hole that they have as an entranceway is exactly perfectly the size and dimensions of their head, so they modify it. And she decides, who's allowed in, who's allowed out, and that stops, any other kind of predators or any unwelcome visitors to the nest. The other really interesting thing about these turtle ants, you can see on the right, is actually that they perform this kind of, I'm not going to say flying, but this kind of gliding behavior. So they live really high up in the rainforest canopy of trees. If they were to fall to, however many meters to the ground, it probably wouldn't kill them, the fall, but actually there's lots of things there that want to eat them, especially in rainforests that are quite wet. They could fall into a river or a puddle, get eaten by fish and frogs. So they really don't want to do that. And what they're able to do is, if they do fall, they can glide and they can control their legs. So they change the position of their legs forwards and backwards. They change the position of their body, and they're actually able to control it so that they can glide back to the tree and hit the trunk and just climb all the way back up rather than fall into the ground. So they're the closest thing that we have to flying ants. And then the final ant, which is just, I only included it because it's cute. I don't have any good stories about it necessarily, but I thought that I should include, this is a Tetramorium ant. It's actually nicknamed the teddy bear ant because it's just so round and cute and adorable. I've shown you lots of ants that sound a little bit fearsome and have these big mandibles and big spines and things. So I just included this one to say that ants can be adorable too. So that was my kind of rundown of some things about ants that I think are really interesting to know about. And finally, I'm going to chat a little bit about fieldwork. I am a field biologist. That's what I do. I go out to different places and perform experiments looking at what ants are kind of doing in the environment, and which ants there are there, how they're kind of interacting with the environment. And so I've been very lucky to travel to lots of different places to be able to do that. So these are some of the countries that I've managed to do fieldwork in when I've been doing fieldwork trips. Usually, if I was face to face with you, I would be asking you to name all of these flags. I'm just going to assume that you're naming them to yourself. You're trying to work out what they all are. I'm going to see if I can remember them now, but it's also a test for me. So from top left, I think we have Kenya, Namibia, South Africa, Spain, Tanzania, Uganda, Mozambique, Vietnam, and Australia. And I also included just the National Geographic logo. So I am a National Geographic explorer, which basically means that they've funded my research expeditions to go and collect ants in some of these amazing places. Oh, okay. So what I usually do as well is a little warning to say, if you're scared of spiders, look away now. It's too late. I'm sorry. Close your eyes if that has happened. I do work on ants. I have worked on other insects, and then also spiders, obviously, which we know are not insects. Insects have 6 legs. Spiders have 8. I've worked on spiders as well. So this is a baboon spider, which is basically a type of tarantula that's found in Africa. This was a trip that I did actually in Mozambique looking for ants, but then I kind of got distracted and found some baboon spiders. So yeah, in terms of fieldwork, what do I do when I'm out in the field? Well, I spend lots of time looking for, the species that I'm studying. In the case of the baboon spiders, the best way to find these spiders, you spend lots of time flipping rocks and things like that, kind of looking in trees. There are a few species that live in trees. One of the really best ways to find them is actually to tickle them out. So you can see here, this is one of my colleagues. He's lifted a rock up. He's found a little nest underneath it, and they have these distinctive. Sometimes they have a little bit of silk around them. You get to recognise which ones are going to have spiders in. But as soon as you go to the entrance of that nest, obviously a spider will kind of retreat in order to protect itself. What you can do is make it think that a nice little bit of food is walking in front of its burrow, maybe about to fall into its nest. So if you use some grass and you actually tickle it, you can poke that around in there, and then a spider will come out, in an attempt to hunt you. And then you can see here in the bottom right, you can take a photograph of it. You can have a look, you can collect it maybe, and then identify what spider you've got there. So spider tickling is actually a legitimate collecting method if you're an arachnologist. There are other ways as well, but this is my most favourite way to collect them. This was actually part of a project, so you can see here this logo, the Baboon Spider Atlas. This was a citizen science project that I worked on, where actually, because most people, when they see a big kind of tarantula-like spider, the first thing they do is take a photograph and they put it on Facebook, they put it on Twitter, and they say, "What is this enormous spider? Is it going to kill me? Is it dangerous? What happened? What's going to happen? What should I do?" They want advice. And so we basically used that as a way of collecting records. So we had all those members of the public out there taking these photographs to say, is this spider venomous? Is it going to hurt me? And we actually use those to collect new records of species around southern Africa, basically. And we found loads of new species. We found a bright purple spider. I think that one was from Mozambique. We found another new spider in Angola. And these are huge spiders, so they're this kind of size. So you wouldn't think you'd be able to discover new species, but just from people snapping a photograph on their farm or in their garden, we discovered loads of new things about all of these quite spectacular spider species. I'm going to go back to ants though, because I know spiders are not for everyone. So yeah, in terms of what I do when I'm out doing fieldwork, I might be doing kind of different experiments out in the field that I've set up. So there's lots of recording data here. You can see I'm just writing things down, making lots of notes. I could also be actually kind of sampling for ants. So sometimes I'm leaving experiments up and running, or I'm putting traps out to collect them. Sometimes I'm actively searching for them. So you can see here I've probably got some leaf litter and sifted through it, and I'm kind of sorting through, trying to find the particular species that I'm interested in. here's a different method where we collect leaf litter, and you kind of goes into the top of this bag that you can see here. You shake it around and sift it so that you don't have like big twigs and sticks and things. So just the good leaf litter falls through. Hopefully all of the ants and other insects that you're interested in fall through. They get collected in the bag at the bottom, and then we can take that back to the lab and basically extract the ants and have a look at them. So it's generally quite physical and quite intensive. I mean, this place where I was working when I was doing this sampling, it was sort of high 30s, but the humidity was so high, so it felt closer to sort of 45 or something, because we were working in tropical forest. So it can be quite physically demanding. Obviously, you're out on long days, kind of doing all of this field work. There's also lots of driving around though in 4x4s, because obviously you're often working in quite remote areas, and you need to get to those in order to do your sampling. So a lot of the sampling that takes place is in places that aren't easily accessible. So there's often a lot of travel involved as well. There are some hazards of driving around. You feel reasonably protected when you're in a big 4x4 like this. Obviously, when you're working in these different countries in Africa, there's other wildlife that you might need to contend with. So you can probably see, this is me driving, you can probably see from my face, I was a little bit unsure, I wasn't very happy. I had a ranger in the car with me, so because I was working in an area with potentially quite dangerous wildlife, I had a wildlife ranger with me with a gun, because it was an area that had lions, leopards, rhinos. Not that a gun's going to do much with those. Elephants, all of these kinds of animals. And he said to me, "Oh, don't worry, this elephant's just going to walk around us. He's going to the watering hole. He's not going to be interested. We should just sit with the engine off and stay still, and we'll be fine." So we sat there, and then it became very clear. This is a young bull elephant, a young male, that he wasn't very happy with us being there. We'd gone to collect our traps that we left out. We'd left some traps out for ants, and he didn't want us to be there collecting our traps. He made that known. He was kind of flapping his ears, which is a warning signal, basically, to say, "Get out of my way, get off my patch." Just after this photo was taken, or maybe as this photo was taken, I had to do some rapid kind of reversing removers back through the bush that was behind us, and get out of the way, essentially. So there are some hazards of doing field work in these kind of exotic tropical places. You can see here from this video as well, a lot of the time. So this work was conducted in Tembe Elephant Park. You can tell by the fact that the reserve is called the Elephant Park. Here's me driving along. Every morning we would go into our field sites. Every morning we would be stuck in kind of this traffic jam behind these forest elephants. It's not recommended to drive any faster at them. You just annoy them. Your best option is just to kind of sit there and wait. And actually, the research that I was doing in this particular place was looking at the impacts of these elephants. So you might not think that elephants and insects are connected to each other, but what we know from ecology is that actually everything is interconnected. So my research was saying, okay, well, we've got these elephants. They're now fenced into a reserve, so they're not following these very ancient migration paths that they would normally. They're fenced into a small area. They're going into forests like this and kind of eating trees in there instead of eating savanna trees from more open areas, which is what they prefer to eat. If you've seen elephants feeding, they can be quite destructive, kind of pulling down branches. They eat a lot of vegetation. And so we wanted to see, okay, well, if they're changing all of this vegetation, what happens to the plants? And then what happens to the insects that are, living in those plants, feeding on those plants? And that didn't just include ants, it included lots of other insects. And is that then having impacts on the other animals that live there? So obviously, you might have small mammals, reptiles, kind of, lizards and things like that. All of these things then rely on the insects. So we were looking at this whole chain of events that was caused by this mega herbivore, this very large mammal, but we were looking at the insects to see how were they actually sort of responding. So sometimes you think these things are nothing to do with each other, but actually everything's really interconnected. See if I can pause that. So yeah, that would be my drive to work. Stuck behind an elephant. Sometimes you get stuck behind wild dogs, which are another animal. This section of the talk is basically other animals that I saw while I was out, also surveying for insects. So I think insects are fascinating, but some people think, it must be very boring. You know, you spend months on end working in these countries and you're only looking at things that you can really only see under a microscope. Actually, it's generally fairly exciting working in these places because you're seeing all of this other wildlife at the same time. So this is a pack of wild dogs that was living in one of the reserves that I was working in. And again, they love to camp out on the road because it's a good hunting spot for them. So they would often be in our way when we were driving to field sites. Yeah, some other animals that I came across, I mentioned that, you know, when I was working in these places, I'd often have to work with local rangers because some of that, you know, some of the wildlife that was there could be quite dangerous. So, for example, lions. So there was this particular pride of lions. If you're sampling your insects and you're, you know, looking down at the ground and you're putting a trap in, you know, you're doing your experiment, observing the behaviour of what an ant is doing. You can't be looking up and looking around and seeing, you know, has a lion snuck up on you, or has a rhino wandered into view. So safety is really important on these trips. So we would always have rangers with us, making sure that actually if we saw any of these animals, we would know what to do, how to respond. There are different ways to respond. If you see a lion or a rhino or an elephant, there's lots of different behaviours. So, you know, you need to know all of that stuff if you're kind of working in the field. Giraffes are obviously not particularly one of the dangerous ones, but they are very inquisitive. So if you're doing field work, they usually like to come and see what you're up to, keep an eye on you. And yeah, these are just a couple of the other animals that I've seen. So probably one of my favourites, chameleons, scorpions that we saw when we were out sampling at night. And these are some of the other animals that I will see when I'm out doing field work. And often, although I'm collecting the ants, you know, I'm looking at other things. So I might also be serving plants that are there. I might be serving other animals that are there to see how these things are kind of interconnected and how they're impacting each other. So it's not just one thing. It's not just that I go and do one thing and look at that. It's often lots of other things and how they interact with each other. I mentioned the rangers already. So one of the challenges of working in these places often is that, you know, there are language barriers. So this particular field site was in KwaZulu-Natal, that part of South Africa. The rangers didn't really speak any English, which is fair enough. Why should they? So I was learning Zulu for the time that I was there, and you know, I've learned Swahili when I've been working in Tanzania, for example. So it definitely helps. All I really learned was you know, words for different types of danger, all the different types of animals, and various things to do with food, because your food breaks are very, very important. But yeah, it's another skill that, you know, as a field biologist, it's not just necessarily how you're collecting things; it's how can you communicate with other people that you're working with. And yeah, just to finish off, to say that, you know, I've worked in various different kind of habitats. So I've shown you a lot of forest work that I've done. I've worked in savannas and in deserts. So this was in the Namib Desert, actually studying ants there. These were in forests and in mountains as well. So mountains are also really kind of interesting systems for studying biology. You would think working in Africa that it's always hot, you know, that I'm always stood around in shorts and t-shirt. As you can see from this image, so this was actually in the Drakensberg Mountains in South Africa. It does snow, it does get very cold and very wet and very rainy. So it's not always me sunning myself, having a nice time. Sometimes it's me in the snow having a nice time as well, looking at ants. And that is everything. Yeah. So I will take any questions. So I think that's fairly good timing. So I think we've got kind of 5-10 minutes for questions if people want to ask anything. I know that was a little bit of a whistle stop tour of various different things. Do people want to pop questions in the chat? Or, okay, do you study the interactions of ants and other insects? So insects with each other, or yeah. So I studied a few different things. So as I say, my PhD was studying ants on acacia trees, and that was basically so in that scenario, the ants live inside swollen thorns on the tree, and so they get somewhere to live, and then they basically defend the tree against herbivores. So they have been known to swarm onto kind of elephants or onto giraffes. Actually, what they're most effective against are other herbivorous insects. So we found out we excluded the ants from the trees, and we looked at how many insects were then kind of feeding on the leaves of those trees. And if the ants are there, they're very good at kind of either eating those insects or just kind of removing them. If we get rid of the ants, so if we exclude them in an experiment, actually we find that the number of insects feeding on the leaves goes up enormously. So yeah, that's because the ants and the herbivorous insects kind of interacting with each other. I've also studied actually just how different ants interact with each other. So they can be very competitive in various different environments. I've studied that both in savanna and in desert. So they can be quite aggressive, territorial. They're very defensive over the different food that they have access to, as well as access to nest sites. Sometimes they'll fight to the death to secure, the ability to nest on a particular tree. And so ants often have something called dominance hierarchies. So some ants are, they're very aggressive. Some ants are more kind of submissive. So those ants tend to be very good at discovering food, getting to it first, and going in and just kind of grabbing what they can. But then other ants that are much better at fighting, they might have like a thicker exoskeleton, so a thicker shell, more spines, more kind of defenses, or maybe bigger mandibles or bigger stings. They tend to be more dominant, and they'll kind of come in and take the food off the first ants that have arrived. So yes, I've done some stuff on ants interacting with each other, but also how they interact with other insects. Yeah, there are also some spiders. I know I mentioned spiders in my talk. There are some jumping spiders that are very good at imitating ants. So they're also very, very interesting, and they do that because ants are quite aggressive. So they make themselves look as if they're ants, so that they don't get eaten, and they sometimes even live inside the nest of ants as well. So even not even just insects, but other kind of invertebrates. Yeah. Any other questions? Have I kept ants as pets? No, I haven't actually. I feel like I should, and I'm very sad about this. I really want to get some ants for my lab, because obviously now that I study ants, I think legitimately I could have some. I could keep some ants as pets, but not pretend that it's for science. It would be for science, but yeah, I'd definitely like to get some ants that I can have just to study them, but also just to kind of see what they get up to. But no, I've never actually had my own, unless you just count infestations of ants in of the kitchen. Does the research cross over or involve herpetology? I haven't done anything directly in terms of herpetology. I've worked on teams where we've been going out and we've just been doing kind of general surveying of an area, so looking at the biodiversity of a particular kind of nature reserve. And in that case, you might have a team of people. So I would be there looking at the insects, but someone else might be there looking at the reptiles and amphibians. Someone else might be there looking at the birds. So yeah, I've never done anything kind of directly related to that. Although I'm sure there is stuff, because lots of reptiles actually feed on ants. So it would be, I'm sure other people are doing that research. But yeah, I haven't done it myself. No.
Thank you, Heather. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah,
Who'd have thought it? Hey, it's brilliant, and it's really interesting as well to hear your process, your life cycle to
yeah,
finding ants. I don't think I've ever known anyone that has studied in so many institutions.
yeah, yeah,
It's just amazing, really. I mean, what a life you've had so far is fantastic. You're so lucky.
yeah. I know. And then I ended up in Shropshire.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
You could have
Oh,
imagined it. Yeah.
oh, it's brilliant. Well, there's only a couple of minutes remaining, so
Okay.
if there
Yeah.
are any other questions, then do send them through. Um, I was wondering if you would be able to tell us a little bit more about the National Geographic, was it Explorer?
Yeah.
How did you get into that?
Yeah. So basically, so a lot of the research that I've done, you know, it was my PhD, for example. I was, you know, I had a studentship and I was studying and I was doing research, and so the costs for doing the research were sort of covered in that. Once I finished my PhD and I had other kind of research positions, um, you know, I might have had like a salary for the position, but to go out and do the actual research, to do the expeditions, I need to find funding to be able to do that. So I would apply to different organisations to get that research funding to allow me to kind of go and do expeditions. And that research funding came from various different places, but yeah, some of my funding came through National Geographic. So they have an Explorer program where yeah, you can basically apply for different grants. So some of it is for you know, science communication and outreach. Some of it is for doing pure research, and a lot of it's for yeah, doing these kinds of expeditions where you're going out and exploring biodiversity and discovering new species and all those kinds of things. So yeah, I just applied to them for some funding basically, and so they've supported a lot of the research that I've done in South Africa basically, and it's nice. They also provide lots of training and events. So there's a whole community of I think
Brilliant.
it's like 4,000 people over the last, I don't know, 10, 20 years or whatever that they've supported. So yeah, so that's something that I'm still kind of involved in because it's a whole community of
Yeah, yeah.
around the world. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I didn't know it existed, so it's sounds amazing. Fab. Well, I'm not sure any more questions are coming through, but your details, I've posted them up for you. So
Yeah.
hopefully you get some
Yeah.
follows
So
on
yeah,
Twitter.
so I'm happy for people to kind of follow up with questions. Obviously, my email's there and my Twitter handle as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us and for giving us all that information. I personally really enjoyed that, and I'm sure everyone else did that's listening. We've got a lot more people listening than are chatting, so it's
Okay.
great. I will let you disappear now. And thank you again.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye.